Welcome. Our guess is that if you are watching this video, you are probably already planning a trip to Yellowstone or maybe to Jackson Hole and might be considering swinging by Grand Teton as a day trip or maybe half a day trip. And at We're in the Rockies, we are here to maybe try to convince you to spend more than an afternoon in the amazing park of Grand Teton.
Most people tend to think of Grand Teton as an afterthought to Yellowstone, but it is so much more. And so in this video, we're going to go over all the things there are to do at Grand Teton, and then we're going to cover so much of the planning process to help you plan your trip.
You are going to be hitting some major crowds when you go to Grand Teton. And so what we're hoping to do with this video is to give you a plan. By the end of this video, it's going to be a little bit lengthy because we're going to go over so much, but we promise you that if you sit through this whole video, you're going to have a good plan of where to stay, what to go do, when to go see it, how long to visit.
Let's get started. First of all, why visit Grand Teton National Park? It is an adventure park. It is an incredible place to go. For example, for a family vacation, you could spend a whole week at Grand Teton and have just an incredible variety of things to do. It's an amazing park for photographers, bikers, hikers, climbers, river rafters, wildlife viewers, drinkers and nightlife people, skiers, swimmers, boaters, and history lovers.
Yeah, it really is kind of the complete deal. I mean, I think Grand Teton, gets overshadowed quite a bit by Yellowstone because of it. Yellowstone is so unique. Grand Teton offers so much variety and a lot more adventure that, I mean, we feel like you have to go see both parks. You can't just go. We get asked on our channel fairly often about, do I need to make a day for Grand Teton? And our answer is a definitive yes.
A couple days.
Yeah, more than one day.
Yellowstone tends to be more of a sightseer park. Teton, more of an adventure park.
And we didn't even mention that Grand Teton's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I don't even think it takes a backseat to the wildlife to Yellowstone. Right. I mean, there's really not a downside to seeing Teton besides the crowds, which we're going to talk about a strategy to deal with those.
Okay, so let's talk about what is Grand Teton National Park. So Grand Teton is named after the Grand Teton Peak. The mountain range here is one of the most famous mountain ranges in the country, maybe in the world. It really is a unique mountain range with these peaks that just jut up out of the ground from this very flat valley floor of Jackson Hole. And then the prominence of the peaks of the mountain range is about 7,000 feet, meaning from the valley floor to the top of the peaks is about 7,000 feet. They're about 13,000 feet above sea level, and they're just beautiful, unique. There are three mountain peaks in the middle there that are Grand Teton, Middle Teton, and South Teton, and they're called the Cathedral Group because they look like spires from a cathedral. These are beautiful mountains that you can see from anywhere in the valley. Really, that is obviously why it was created as a national park, is this beautiful mountain range. But at the base of the mountain range, there are 7 lakes. 6 of these are glacial lakes, meaning they were formed by glaciers shoving boulders down the mountains. And these lakes are the most popular spots in the park. People love to hike to these lakes, and you can even swim in these lakes, although the water is very cold. But you can get in the water and play around a little bit.
And they're crystal clear, beautiful lakes. I really cannot think of a place that captures the essence of a national park more than Grand Teton because it is so mountainous and beautiful. Although Grand Teton is kind of almost in 2 different sections, you get a different experience in the northern part of it than you do in the southern.
Yeah, so I mentioned there's 6 glacial lakes sitting at the bottom of the range. The most famous of these is Jenny Lake, but on the northern end is Jackson Lake, which is a large lake that's been dammed up, and so it's really a resort area. You can motorboat, and there's a lot of things to do at Jackson Lake. A lot of lodges stay around on the lake. There's
a beach, but not your typical beach of sand. It's a beach of rocks, and might want to wear some protective footwear.
So, and then the park also includes the Jackson Hole Valley, which I mentioned is this pretty large flat valley with the Snake River running through it. The valley is home to a lot of wildlife, bison, antelope, moose. When you think of Grand Teton, you think of moose, right? If you want to see a moose, you go to Grand Teton. In fact, there's a city there named Moose. And so that's a great place to see moose. And then, as I mentioned, antelope
And bears.
And bears are there. In fact, one of the most famous bear in the world resides in Grand Teton National Park. Her name is Bear399. She has her own Instagram page. Just a world famous bear that people travel around to visit or to try to get a glimpse at. She walks around with her 4 little cubs. So the Jackson Hole Valley is a beautiful area just to enjoy and to look for wildlife. Then right outside of the park is also the city of Jackson, Wyoming, which is a really famous town for being just a Western themed town.
I call it the glitzy cowboy town. Like, it has sequins and glitter all over it. It's kind of an upscale Western town with a heck of a nightlife. That's one of the fun things about doing like the Grand Teton Jackson Hole thing. Jackson Hole is only 30 miles away, actually 20 miles away, about a 30-minute drive from Grand Teton. And so it's very possible to stay, like if you're not into roughing it, stay in Jackson Hole and you can have your nightlife, your nice dinner, and then go connect with nature during the day.
The town of Jackson also has a very famous little town square with these antler arches that are at all 4 corners of the park. And so it's very common to get your picture taken in front of these antler arches. The antlers come from a nearby place called the National Elk Refuge, which is where they established this refuge for elk to winter. Over the winter can be kind of brutal on some of the animals there, so the elk tend to come down from Yellowstone and hang out at this elk refuge, and they feed them and keep them alive during the winter. It's got a whole story behind it. Back in the early 1900s, the elk were starving and literally dying all over the place, and so the community really gathered together and donated a lot of their hay and feed to keep these animals alive. And eventually they got the support of Congress to actually donate money to and this land is the National Elk Refuge to support these elk. So for 100 years or so, this elk refuge has existed and supported the elk during the winter. Also nearby is Teton Village. So this is a little resort area with tons of condos and apartments that you can stay at, and it's a ski resort actually. So you can, in the winter, you can downhill ski there. In the summer, you can actually use the ski lifts to ski to ride to the top of the mountain with your mountain bike and mountain bike down the trails. They have a frisbee golf. They have lots of places to eat and drink. I mean, it is...
You talk about Canyon Village?
Teton Village.
Oh, Teton Village, yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of an overview of what Grand Teton is. Let's talk about how to get to Grand Teton National Park. I think the most common places that people would fly into to get to Teton is Jackson, Wyoming. So it has its own airport there that sits right next to the park. Also, a lot of people are going to fly into Bozeman, Montana, because that sits on the north side of Yellowstone. And so, again, a lot of people are hitting Grand Teton as they hit Yellowstone.
Yeah, like part of a road trip.
And then also Salt Lake City is another airport that you might fly into to get to Grand Teton. Now, we ran a bunch of flights from all over. We just searched flights up from all over the country to these 3 airports. What you want to do is look at all 3. So Salt Lake's a lot farther away. It's about a 5-hour drive, 6-hour drive away from Grand Teton. But you might find a cheaper flight there. So it actually is pretty common for people to fly into Salt Lake and then drive to Yellowstone or Teton.
Yes, and if you're coming for a while and doing a road trip, it might make sense to you to fly into Salt Lake. We have a whole article about this on our website, we'reintherockies.com, that has tables and breaks it down and the amenities of each airport if you're interested.
Yeah, the bottom line, just to check all 3, depending on where you're flying from and maybe the time of the year, certain ones could be cheaper than others. There are 3 main entrances to Grand Teton. One is coming from Yellowstone. So as you leave the south entrance of Yellowstone, you're entering in the north entrance of Grand Teton, which is right by Coulter Bay Village and Jackson Lake. The other entrance is from Jackson, Wyoming. So those are the 2 most common by far.
Now, on our channel, we get asked a lot can I camp in Yellowstone and go do Grand Teton, or the opposite?
Mm-hmm.
And our take is, we really think that your home base should be where you're staying, because the thing is, with both Grand Teton and Yellowstone, the mileage, it's not like you can drive 60 miles per hour through these parks. 30 miles might not look like that far on a map, but speed limits generally stay around 40, 45 miles. And so there can be some traffic. We know that, and plus, this is just from the south entrance of Yellowstone to the north entrance of Grand Teton is over an hour drive. And our favorite part of Grand Teton is the southern part.
Yeah, I mean, you still have a fair amount of driving to get to the heart of the park wherever you're going.
And kind of the heart of Yellowstone is a little bit north of the southern entrance. And so
definitely.
So you're adding extra driving time onto both of those things.
Yeah, we think even though they're right by each other, they're separate locations you want to stay at. You don't want to use one as a home base for both.
And same thing with Jackson Hole. If you don't want to, if you want to stay in Jackson Hole, that's cool. Jackson Hole is a cool place. But one thing to keep in mind is Jackson is quite crowded too. And traveling to and from Grand Teton from Jackson at popular times can present a little bit of a problem.
Now, I'm not a word Nazi here, but I do feel the need to bring it up because people will bring it up on our video. And when you visit, people will bring it up that Jackson is the city. And then Jackson Hole is the whole surrounding valley. So I'm telling you, people will bring it up. They tend to get used interchangeably. And again, I'm just not that much of a word Nazi, but that's the way it is. Jackson is the little city, and then Jackson Hole is the whole surrounding valley. In fact, the people that live around Jackson, in Jackson Hole, they call it the Hole. That's kind of their term for Jackson Hole and for the valley. Hole being a term that mountain men used to use, the fur trappers used to use it all the time as a term for valley. So.
Well, we've noticed. We haven't introduced ourselves, and I'm guessing a lot of you that are on may not be members of our channel, but we're Matt and Cheryl from We're in the Rockies, and we consider ourselves Western locals. We live in Utah. But just a little bit about us. Matt teaches an adjunct history class at our local university, and I'm a special ed teacher. But we were both history majors, and that's how we met. And our whole purpose of our channel is that we think that when you travel to the West, it should be a good experience, and we want you to have an amazing trip. So we do videos about planning your trip, and then we also do some interest videos about fun things that are going on, or just interesting history and stories about some of the places in the West. Mm-hmm. So if this sounds like it's up your alley, subscribe. We'd love to have you, and leave comments. We always love to hear your questions, comments, observations, anything.
Okay, let's now talk about getting around Grand Teton National Park. So you have to have a vehicle. It's not a shuttle park like some places are out there or becoming. You got to have a vehicle. It takes about an hour maybe to drive from the north end of the park to the south end of the park. So it's a much smaller park than Yellowstone, but as Cheryl mentioned, it has just about as many visitors, and so it can get crowded.
Now, I do think that Grand Teton visitors are spread out over a longer period of time because Jackson is a skiing place. You know, that it's a skiing resort, and people hit Tetons then, where Yellowstone you can go to in the winter. But I don't think, I like people visit Yellowstone May through September, and then it's a very, very small amount, where I think the crowds are a little more dispersed throughout the year at Grand Teton, but still same amount of visitors and a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. So that means that the parking lots at the most popular hikes and attractions will fill up, and they'll fill up and cars will be overflowing out onto the main road. So there are two main roads that go through Teton National Park. There's something called the inner road and the outer road. The parking lots will fill up and the cars will be all lined up on those roads, the main roads. So you might end up parking and having to walk a half a mile or a mile just to get to the start of your hike, and then you're going to hike from there. So
we call it bonus hiking when you have to park far away.
So our take here is that you want to visit the popular sites early and late, and then in the middle of the day visit some of the either less popular sites, or go into town and eat lunch or take a nap or something like that. But we suggest getting up quite early and visiting some of the places, and then kind of taking a break in the middle of the day, and then getting back to the park around 4 or 5 o'clock maybe. And by that point, a lot of those popular sites are really starting to empty out, and you'll have some really nice experiences that are kind of to yourself.
Seriously, this might be the most valuable tip we can give you. Be an early bird and a night owl. And then remember, like we said earlier, and we'll talk about it more, there are so many activities to do there, like the river rafting and the biking. Those are great things to do in the middle of the day if you don't need sleep. But if you're tuckered out, don't feel guilty about taking a nap. That was one of our favorite things we did last trip we went there.
Now, there is one shuttle, so just in fairness, while we're talking about getting around, there is one shuttle that goes from Coulter Bay and will kind of shuttle you a little bit throughout the park. So you could look into that if you're staying at Signal Lodge, I believe. And I can't exactly remember where it starts from right off the top of my head here, but I'm not really aware of anybody who's used it. I think it's mostly a vehicle park for sure, but there is one shuttle you could look into. Okay, our next section is what to see and do at Grand Teton National Park. The number one thing
is, of course, the Tetons, the beautiful mountain range. You're going to love it. And the best thing about it is you can see those Tetons anywhere you are in the park. So if you're just driving around, you get real spoiled. At the end of your trip, you're like, where are those mountains? They're not here anymore. But they're incredible. You will love them, and really you'll see them anywhere you are at. And there are some wonderful short hikes to help you enjoy the surrounding area. These are all shorter hikes that are fairly level. And I'm talking these hikes no longer than 2 miles. And what these hikes are is they're not necessarily climbing up the Tetons. That's not what these hikes are about. They are to get you to some of these mountain lakes, and then you can see that beautiful lake and then have the Tetons in the background.
Let's go through each of these real quick. So the number one hike to do and thing to do there is Jenny Lake. So when you arrive at Jenny Lake, they have a visitor center there and an outdoor display area. There's a big parking lot there, and you walk over to the boat dock, and they will take a boat shuttle. You can take a boat shuttle across the lake, and then when you get off, you'll hike to Hidden Falls, which is kind of tucked away in the mountains, but it's called Hidden Falls behind the trees there. And then you'll walk up the hill to Inspiration Point, which provides you a great overlook of Jenny Lake and the Jackson Hole Valley. So that is really the number one hike. The number one thing to do at Grand Teton is Jenny Lake and the Hidden Falls Inspiration Point hike.
That'll take you about half a day to do that whole thing by the time you take the shuttle. You can hike around the lake to go do that, but that's 2 extra miles you're adding to an already kind of long hiking day, and there's so much to see in the park. We definitely recommend taking the shuttle.
Okay, then the next popular hike probably is Taggart Lake. This is about a 3-mile round trip, I think, hike to Taggart Lake. And it takes you through some really beautiful views. You cross over a stream, you go through some aspens, some pines. It has beautiful wildflowers, some berries, you'll see some big glacial boulders sitting on the side of the hike there that have been pushed down by the glaciers. And then you get to Taggart Lake, which is a place you can kind of play around the water a little bit and has some great views of the Tetons right behind it.
And that's probably my favorite hike that we went on. I really liked Taggart Lake, and I also felt like we got away from the crowds on Taggart. We did it in the evening, and there were not really people sharing that site with us. We were on our own. It was a wonderful time.
The next one is Phelps Lake. Phelps Lake you can get to from 2 different spots. You can do kind of a little hike to overlook the lake from the mountain, and then you can hike up to the lake from the bottom. Again, probably about a 3-mile round trip or something like that. And right by there, the parking lot for Phelps Lake, there is a place called the Rockefeller Preserve. This is a relatively new spot in the park that has a little museum display that you can visit. They have something called the Waterfall Experience, where you can kind of go walk out into this little waterfall, kind of fun for the kids. But that is Phelps Lake is another beautiful little hike. And then let's see. So those are the three main glacial hikes. The hikes to the glacial lakes and all that. But it's also a great park for wildlife viewing and photography. We mentioned there's a lot of wildlife that you can see there because of the valley floor. And there are some really famous photography spots to get to take pictures of the mountains. There's wildflowers well into summer because it's high elevation, so you can take pictures of the flowers and then of the wildlife as well. So we definitely recommend taking some binoculars. And then if you're into photography, or if you just want some nicer pictures of your wildlife, we recommend buying a nicer camera with a zoom lens or renting one, something like that, so that you can get some good shots of the wildlife. Because people think of Yellowstone a lot of times as the wildlife park, but Teton, you can see just as much there. And again, you're more likely to see moose. You're less likely to see wolves there, but you are more likely to see moose there.
Oh yeah, and I think seeing a moose is almost as cool as seeing a bear. They are huge and unusual animals. They kind of look like they're a mixture of, I don't know. It looks like
they're cool.
Yeah.
They're really cool. Okay, other things you could do there. Adventure sports. So long hikes, okay, backcountry hiking. So Cheryl mentioned a lot of the hikes that we include in our guide are kind of at the base of the mountains, not crazy steep or anything like that. But you can do all-day hikes up into the mountains that are famous and that just really provide some amazing views. Swimming. You can do some swimming, kayaking, and paddleboarding on these little lakes. The best ones are String Lake. Well, that's the best one.
Yeah, oh yeah.
String Lake is the best one.
String Lake is a mountain paradise. It really is. It is amazing how clear that lake is and the gorgeous views. You're right next to those mountains and the trees. I mean, there's a reason that parking lot fills up fast. It's incredible.
Jenny Lake, you can also rent a kayak and kayak around on that lake. I don't think that would be a good paddleboarding lake, but String Lake is a wonderful paddleboarding and kayaking lake. It's much more shallow and tame. Anyway, there's water sports that you can do there. You can also do rafting and floats. So in the park, in Grand Teton National Park, the Snake River runs through it, and it's quite tame. And you can do these dinner floats. You can work with these companies that will take you on a float down the river. They're real tame floats, and then they feed you dinner before or after the float. You can also go outside of the park to some world-class, world-famous whitewater rafting that's just south of Grand Teton. So
yes,
both types of rafting.
You've probably heard of the Snake River, maybe Big Kahuna, Lunch Counter. Those are all big rapids that are on the Snake River. Very, very popular. I think that's why, as a kid, I didn't make it up to Grand Teton as much, was because we were rafting the Snake River. And it is a great adventure. Plus, you're going to see some beautiful views, and your raft guides will keep you safe if you go through a rafting company.
You can also rock climb at Grand Teton. It's very popular, and even for beginners, they have there's some businesses there that you can hire to take you up to some and kind of teach you how to do some real easy rock climbs and stuff like that. So
and there is a kind of I call it like an outdoor mini mall called Dornan's, kind of central to Grand Teton, more towards the southern end. But you can arrange a lot of these tours for things like fly fishing, rock climbing, rafting. It's kind of like an all-for-one. Get in there, book your stuff. You can also get food there, some snacks. That's a great place to go to arrange a lot of these activities and adventures. Also, if you're wanting to do the Snake River, a lot of those companies are based in Jackson.
Yeah, so if you want to kayak or paddleboard on String Lake, you can rent that from Dornan's if you want to. Okay, bicycling, again, is another really popular activity at Teton. So along the inner road, they have a bike trail that kind of parallels that inner road that goes all the way through the park. Teton is much more of a biker's park than Yellowstone is. Yellowstone really doesn't have that many biking trails, but Teton has trails all over the place. And then, as I mentioned, you can go to Teton Village, put your mountain bike on the back of the ski lift that takes you to the top. You get to the top, get out, and you mountain bike down the hill. Saw that quite a bit when we were there. I mean, bicycling is a great activity. Saw a lot of families doing that as well.
Yes, and there's over 60 miles of bike paths throughout Grand Teton. It's just picturesque. Next time we go, I'm bringing my bike, or I'm renting one, because I want to do that. One little note is dogs are not allowed on the bike trail. I know most trails, dogs are welcome, but not there. So just a little tidbit to know. And also these bike paths are fairly level, and doesn't the path go into Jackson?
I'm not sure on that. Probably.
Yeah, I think I saw that the path went all the way to Jackson as in part of that trail system. So double check on that, or maybe we will and put it in the captions. But yes, that is definitely a spot to go biking. And as Matt mentioned, in Yellowstone, a lot of times you're biking along the shoulder of the road and kind of dangerous. But at Jackson and Grand Teton, it's not on the road; it's separate path.
Okay, horseback riding is another one. So they actually have dude ranches in the park. These dude ranches have a long history in Grand Teton. One of them is called the Triangle X. But there's a couple of places where you can go horseback riding. You can also do, I think, a pretty affordable little horse carriage ride in the city of Jackson. Takes you around the city for a little bit. So horseback riding is a big one. And then there's golf courses nearby, and even disc golf at Teton Village. You can play frisbee or disc golf. So, man, there's just so many activities to do, fun things for kids, for families, for adventure lovers. So there's also some history sites there. Teton is a really interesting park in that there are a lot of settlements and cabins and, as I mentioned, dude ranches and other places like that all throughout Jackson Hole Valley. There's a reason why it has that, and that's because people had settled the valley before it became a national park. And then as they were trying to get it to become a national park, it was like this long 50-year battle to try to convert the Jackson Hole Valley into a national park, which required these settlers to sell their property and stuff like that. And it was really a controversial thing that ended with Wyoming being the only state in America in which the president cannot just set aside land as a national monument. It has its own specific law, which is really interesting. Again, we cover that in the audio guide.
Yep, another very cool story.
Tons of history sites there that you can stop at, little cabins, great photo spots. So anyway, history lovers could like it. As I mentioned, there's dude ranches that you can stay at and that you can visit and have kind of that Western experience. Also, we mentioned Jackson Lake is kind of a resort area. So this is a big lake with a lot of boats and stuff like that, lodges that you can stay at. And you can take a boat ride out to Elk Island in the middle of the lake and do dinner out at Elk Island. So these dinner tours. I mean, so many cool things that you can do there. And
I wanted to mention that on this video, we're kind of just glancing over the entire trip planning process, but we've made lots of other videos with pretty good details of, like, if you hear us talk about Jenny Lake and you want to do it, check out our video on that. But stay on this one because this is going to be the whole complete comprehensive thing. So this is going to give you a great overview. But maybe afterwards, check out our Grand Teton playlist and watch those videos if there's something striking your fancy that you want to know a little bit more about.
And then we just touched on the city of Jackson being a Western city, a little bit more upscale. There's a lot of art galleries there. There's some really kind of famous old bars and restaurants that have shopping, nightlife. So Jackson's got its own thing. Yeah, shows to do. So, all right, let's talk about where to stay when you visit Grand Teton. So you can stay in the park. There are different lodges in the park, like Signal Mountain Lodge. There's Jackson Lodge. As I mentioned, there's dude ranches that you can stay at. So there are quite a few places in the park that you can stay. But as opposed to Yellowstone, there's a big advantage to staying inside the park because of the transportation issue. You don't need to feel like that so much with Grand Teton. So they have a ton of places, as we mentioned, at Teton Village that you can, there's probably like Airbnbs and condos that you can rent, like VRBOs maybe.
Just like even a huge complex of places to stay because Teton Village is a ski resort. Mm-hmm. So they have all these nice accommodations to stay, and that is pretty darn close to Grand Teton. And then there's Jackson, the city of Jackson, which is going to have a lot of places to stay too. Inside the park, you're probably looking at around $200 to $400 a night. Outside of the park, you might get a little cheaper, but as I mentioned, it's kind of an upscale place. Yeah, and your lodging's not going to be cheap. It's probably going to be expensive. So we don't have specific recommendations right now, but those are the three main places: inside the park, Teton Village, and Jackson that you can be looking at, and all of them are just fine. All right, the next one is camping in Grand Teton, which is what we do because lodging is so expensive. And there are some great campsites inside the park at Grand Teton. The first one I want to mention is Gravant Campground. It looks like Gross Venture when you read it, but it's a French It's a French name, so Gravant. You're going to sound like such a pro when you just roll that off your tongue. And Coulter Bay. Those are the two big campgrounds. They have over 300 campsites in each of them, correct?
Right.
So they're big. Now, Grand Teton went through some major growing pains last year, and up until last year, they were first come, first serve. And it was kind of a good and a bad thing. For part of me thinks, well, it was great because this was, most national parks are reservation only now, but it was nice to have a vacation you could go on if you were going to go last minute. You didn't have to have booked it out 6 months in advance like most national parks. But the problem to this was, and then also these campsites were so big. 300 campsites would never fill up, right? Not in 2020. These places were filling up before 8 a.m. Right. Every day. They were filled up. We talked to the camp host about it. He's like, every day we have been at capacity. We have to turn people away. And it turned into a major problem with people boondocking on the sides of the road in all sorts of places. And so this year they switched over to 100% reservations for the national parks.
For the 8 campgrounds in the park. So there are 8 campgrounds. They are all now on a reservation system. Okay.
You can go to recreation.gov. You can book these campsites 6 months in advance. So if you're considering going to Grand Teton and you want to camp, go ahead and book that as quickly as you can so that you can reserve a spot.
Now there are many campgrounds outside of Grand Teton, so I want to make sure this distinction is clear because it is big news that they switched over to an all reservation system within the park. But outside of the park is run by the Forest Service, and there's actually 2 different Forest Service districts that operate just right outside of Grand Teton. Those are still first come, first serve, and you can find out more about those by going to the Forest Service website. We've done another video all about this to try to give you more information about it. So anyway, camping is a huge thing at Grand Teton. Just remember, in the park, reservations; outside of the park, first come, first serve.
Well, and we'd love to get feedback from you. If you would like, if you have an interest in camping that's not just in the national park, we'd love to hear it in a comment. We've considered maybe making a little ebook or something with the maps because as we've traveled there, it's really hard to piece all this information together from the Forest Service and the national park and which is first come, first serve and which is reservation. We thought about creating a little product and adding that on to our Teton package, but we'd love to hear from you if that would be helpful. Or if you've been there since this year started, we'd love to hear your feedback on what your experience has been securing a campsite.
Okay, let's talk about where to eat. People are always interested in where to eat, so there are places inside the park, some pretty popular places inside the park to eat. So Dornan's, we mentioned, has all this gear that you can rent for some of your adventure sports, but they also have a chuck wagon, dinner area. They serve breakfast, they serve lunch and dinner. They have a little pizza place there at Dornan's. They have on Monday nights something called the Hoot Nanny, where you can go and eat dinner and drink and stuff like that and sing songs and whatever. So that's a pretty fun little tradition. And
we haven't actually eaten there, but we were there and it smelled amazing. Mm-hmm. So I feel like I could recommend it off of the yummy smells.
Mm-hmm. Jackson Lake Lodge has a real well-known kind of steak dinner, just a nice place to eat at. One of the most popular places that I've heard is Leek's Pizza up north at Coulter Bay. Leek's Marina and Pizza is a real popular spot there. And then I mentioned that you can do dinner tours out to Elk Island in the middle of Jackson Lake. So, and then also where we ate last time we went there, again, a lot of times we pack picnics, but where we ate last time was at Teton Village, and you can ride the gondola to the top of the mountain. They have a couple of little restaurants up there, a little pizza place that you can, and a waffle place actually, that you can eat and while you're just overlooking some amazing views of the valley. That is a really cool spot. And at the bottom of Teton Village is a real famous place called the Mangy Moose. It's a bar and restaurant that we see people wearing shirts of the Mangy Moose just around town, even all over the West. So it's a real famous place, the Mangy Moose.
Yeah, but the restaurant up at the top of the gondola is really cool, and there's basically 2 restaurants. There's a fancier one with wine, the Off Pista. I'm saying this like a complete hillbilly. But But then there's the other one that serves slices of pizza, and they're really affordable. $4 each was what it was last year, and it was great. Eat your piece of pizza, see the incredible views, and last year we were able to ride the gondola for free after 5:30. I am not sure if that's continuing this year. It seems like the world is upside down and changing constantly with the current pandemic. But maybe something to look into as you're making your travel plans, especially if you can go on that gondola for free. That's great. That is a must do. Mm-hmm. It's even maybe a must do if you have to pay for it. It's really cool, but definitely see if maybe you can finagle your way into a free gondola ride.
Let's talk about when to visit next. So summers are the most crowded, obviously, because kids are out of school and that's the travel season and all that, but also because that is the best weather for that area. So this is high elevation, and the summers are gorgeous. It's not too hot or anything like that. It's in the 80s, I believe,
for the highs.
For the highs most of the summers,
and can get into the 40s at night. So dress in layers.
Yeah, so if you were camping or something, it could still be chilly. If you're getting up really early to go to certain sites, you'll probably want a jacket even in the summer.
Yes, in fact, when we went to go take pictures in the morning at the barn, people had blankets wrapped around them. Like, it's pretty chilly if you're there before the sun rises.
The valley sits a little lower than Yellowstone, so it actually has a longer travel season than Yellowstone. Yellowstone actually will close in the winter, specifically so that the snow can build up on the roads, and then the winter it becomes just a snowmobile park, really. Teton, a little different. They plow that road all winter long, one of the main roads there. So the travel season is a little longer. You can still visit earlier in the spring, later in the fall. If you go in the spring, the hikes could be pretty muddy, and when we say spring, we're talking all the way up through May. You could have some pretty muddy hikes probably. The winters, there's more things to do there than Yellowstone, so you can visit the elk refuge and go on a little ride out through the elk, and that's a really popular activity to do. You can ski, both cross-country skiing and downhill skiing at Teton Village, and there's other ski resorts there, by the way. You can visit Granite Hot Springs, which is about an hour south, and Granite Hot Springs, they have these hot springs that you can sit in and enjoy, and nearby they also have a place where you can do a dog sled tour, like a dog sled ride all the way up to Granite Hot Springs in the winter. Now, Granite Hot Springs is a place that you can visit in the summer too, and they have a campground there.
And one that doesn't fill up, right?
And from my understanding, it didn't fill up last year. Again, that's run by the Forest Service, first come, first served, and it didn't fill up. So that's a little
tidbit for you.
Tidbit, yeah, for sure. And then they do, even in the winter, they do ranger-led tours. So the park rangers will take you on these little tours. So really, year-round place to visit.
But I would say if you're wanting to, wear shorts and then have good weather, you're looking kind of June through September is when it's going to be warm. The camp host at Grand told us that I think it was the 2nd of October, that's when they were closing the campground. It hit 0 degrees, freezing temperatures at the beginning of October. And so once you get into October, I mean, you may get a little bit of a longer season and it might be doable, but the campgrounds start closing up right around the beginning of October.
May is a great time to see wildlife. So a lot of the bears coming out of their dens in May. I've heard a lot of great things about visiting in May, but it'll still be a little cold at times. The weather, let's talk about the weather real quick while we're talking about that. So high elevation and dry. We're in the west, it's quite dry.
We always hear people from the east talk about how it's hot here, but it's a dry heat.
Yeah.
And we kind of don't really know what that means. We've been to Florida a couple times, but
yeah, it's definitely
there's no humidity here.
Yeah, no humidity.
But that is a good tip for you too. If you are used to higher humidity, your skin is going to dry out here. Bring your chapstick, your moisturizer, your lotion. Just be prepared, because even though it's not boiling hot, it's dry, and you'll feel it. You'll be a lot more comfortable if you bring those things with you.
Okay, let's talk about how many days to visit the park. This is a question that we get asked a lot. So national parks are kind of laid out in layers a little bit. You could spend one day at the Tetons and essentially drive through the park, see the Tetons, maybe do Jenny Lake, and that would be an awesome day.
It would be a really good day. Although I would not say that you've done the Tetons properly if that's what you do.
No. So I think you could spend a good 3 days in the park doing, looking for wildlife, doing some of the major hikes, spending a little bit of time at Jackson, and like 3 days would be a really good time to get a good feel for the Tetons.
And if you actually, it's funny, some people in our neck of the woods in Utah have not really been to Yellowstone, but they like to go on family vacations to Grand Teton, and they'll spend a week there because they do the activities. It's not just about seeing the sights, it's about going there and going on a family river trip.
Yes.
Or rock climbing or biking. Like we said at the beginning of the video, there are so many fun adventures you can go on at Grand Teton. So if you're going to go on some adventures, give yourself a week.
Oh, this could easily be kind of a family reunion type of a thing, or just a nice summer family vacation to go spend a week at Teton and play and see the mountains and the rivers and the wildlife. Really
Much variety at Grand Teton.
Yeah. Let's talk about what to pack real quick. I mentioned that you want to have binoculars to look at wildlife. So we have a link in the description here to the binoculars we recommend, which are Vortex, that are great binoculars at an affordable price. Again, if you're wanting to get some good pictures of either the mountains or the wildlife, you'll want a pretty nice camera. Especially with wildlife, you'll want something with a zoom lens. We have another video about what to pack for Grand Teton and Yellowstone that you can check out. We'll put in the description, but you'll want something with a zoom lens if you're going to take pictures of wildlife. And then you could pack like a inflatable paddleboard or kayak. So we saw people doing this last time that we were there. They have these nice inflatable paddleboards
that folded into a nice backpack, like very small and portable, like something you could take on an airplane if you wanted to.
Or if you're road tripping there, it might be a good thing to take as well. And I kind of thought they'd be flimsy and maybe a little hokey. Not at all. They were just as good as a plastic paddleboard. So really, really nice.
We are big fans of wearing running shoes when you go to these national parks, not hiking boots. Hiking boots definitely have their place if you're doing backcountry through marshy areas, but even though the trails aren't paved at Grand Teton, running shoes are just the way to go. You can get trail runners if you're concerned about traction. They have nice flexibility, cushion. They'll keep your feet happy. They're a good pair of trail runners.
If you're going to go off the beaten path into the little bit of the backcountry hikes, then you'll want to consider taking bear spray. You can rent this at, I believe, the visitor center.
Or buy it if you want to own it. And actually, we've learned that there are quite a few places in Jackson that will rent you things like cameras, binoculars, and bear spray. So those are all good things to rent if you're concerned about having to travel with them. Bear spray is not even allowed on airplanes, so you can pick it up at the visitor center if you need to. And
then just real quickly, again, dress in layers most likely. You might want to bring a poncho in case it starts raining on you. It does tend to rain at random times in the mountains. Mosquito repellent, not a bad idea. Snacks for some of those longer hikes or something like that.
Well, and unlike Yellowstone, where we say that you're gone for the entire day when you're hitting the main road, Teton you can come back to your hotel room. It's not so big that you can't do that, but at the same time it is good to have a little bit of food on you just in case you see a wild animal, and not to feed it, but if you're wanting to sit around and watch it, you'll have something to eat and not be hungry and be tied to having to go back to your hotel.
Which we definitely recommend. If you see a bunch of people pulled over, if you see some rangers there, you might be looking at Bear 399 in the area, and I would definitely recommend hanging out there for a while, see if you can get a look at her and her cubs. Or again, moose, you'll want to definitely check them out if you end up seeing a crowd there looking for moose. Our final tip, I would say, is just you want to have a pretty good game plan. As with anywhere that you go, you want to have a game plan. But the national parks, in particular, are really exploding in popularity. With Corona, people doing domestic travel more than foreign travel, and so wow, they have really blown up in the last couple of years.
Well, and what you don't want to have happen is drive to Grand Teton and not be able to get out of your car and see these sights. I think that this is so possible to happen. Our first trip to Grand Teton earlier this summer, when we couldn't find a camping spot, we're like, okay, well maybe we'll just go see some of these sights. But we couldn't because we were there at 2 or 3 in the afternoon and all the parking lots were full. We basically saw Grand Teton from the road, and that's just not how that park's meant to be seen, which is why we created an itinerary and audio guide to make it the best experience for you. So we have our Grand Teton National Park itinerary. This is 3 days of the best things to see at Grand Teton National Park.
So it's laid out with a little game plan for each day, and each day kind of has a theme or a topic. So
you can see like
day one is called Meet the Tetons, and so our audio guide that goes along with it, I'll tell you all about the geology of the Tetons and how they were formed and stuff like that. Day 2, I've named Rockies and Bullwinkle, because I get you to the best places to view the Tetons and take photos of them, and then also the best places to find moose, bullwinkle. And then day 3 is called Coulter's Run, where you go up to Coulter Bay, but you also learn who Coulter was, and you learn the story behind this famous mountain man. I'll tell you the story about why Jenny Lake is named Jenny Lake, which is really quite a touching story with her and her husband, who was a mountain man. So this is like a self-guided audio tour of Grand Teton. So you would pay hundreds of dollars to have a guide to take you around Teton for 3 days. You'd pay quite a bit of money for that. You know, you can hire these guides to go around in your car. For us, much, you know, if you do ours, it's much cheaper. Plus, you don't have to deal with the BO.
Or the awkward people on your tour bus. We love that. You know, when we go to plan a trip somewhere, it can be overwhelming. All the write-ups there are online, all the videos, all those things. And to me, if I want to go on vacation, I want to see cool things and I want to relax. And so we're hoping we can do that for you, that you can buy this guide, download it, print it, and go on your trip. And that we have over 2 hours of audio stories that I can say this because I didn't make them. They are incredible, fascinating stories that will make Grand Teton even better for you.
So the way the audio guide works, by the way, is so this will tell you, you know, drive from here to here for your next stop. And if the drive is around a 30-minute drive or something like that, you'll listen to about a 10 to 15-minute audio of a story of the park, what you're going to see next, something like that, that'll kind of explain and put into context what you're looking at.
And this is 28 pages of step by step. So this isn't like buying a book that says, oh, there's this site and this site. This actually gives you a plan, like go to this site at this time, because we know when the parking lots fill up.
And then also we have some flexibility in there for you as well, depending on what you're interested in doing. So
yeah.
Now, if you want a little sample of what the audio tour sounds like, then stick around. We'll play just a couple of minutes of that for you so that you can kind of get a feel for the type of things that you'll learn if you buy our self-guided tour.
Yep, so it's just we'reatherockies.com. You'll find the link for the store right there.
All right, thanks for watching.
Have a wonderful trip to the Tetons.
So you're driving to Coulter Bay this morning, and that, of course, is named after John Coulter. He was really the Western version of Daniel Boone. He was a real legend in his day. He and a buddy went out looking for some furs to trap, and they went into the Blackfeet territory to get these furs. Now remember, they had had a battle the previous year with the Blackfeet, so they knew they weren't on good terms with them. So they trapped at night to avoid being caught by the Blackfeet Indians. Well, at one point they were paddling up the river, and they heard a noise. And John Coulter thought it was Indians nearby, and his buddy, who was named Potts, thought it was bison. So he said, let's just keep going, it's just bison. Well, Potts was wrong. It was actually the Blackfeet Indians who had tracked him down. So the Blackfeet beckoned Coulter and Potts to come to the shore and get out of their canoe. They did, and the Indians took their gun. Coulter, who was supposedly a large, strong man, grabbed the gun, stole it back, and Potts grabbed it from Coulter and fired the gun and killed one of the Blackfeet Indians. So Potts was lit up by arrows from the tribe and died instantly, of course. Coulter, who did not fire the gun, was brought to the shore and was stripped naked. The Indian chief asked him if he could run well. Now remember, Coulter was friendly with the Indians and had an ability to communicate with them. He knew some of their language. So he told them no, couldn't run very well. So the chief told him he would give him a head start. And he let Coulter start running across the open field and gave him a head start. After about 300 or 400 yard head start, he let his tribe go after him.